Hi, everybody. I'm not sure we've met, but my name is Cameron, and I'm the president and CEO of the Alaska Humanities Forum, and it's really a pleasure to be here today. Um, and I'm here with Aud. I think all three of you know Aud from probably past work. Aud, do you want to introduce yourself? Aud, do you know all three of our participants today?
I do. I've interacted with them on various levels.
Okay,
So
right. Okay, super. Well, we can keep this pretty informal. I mean, the goal today is really to spend some time debriefing the seven depolarizing vaccine conversations, and so this is our eighth and final webinar, and on our series on better vaccine conversations. And at home and at work and in virtual meeting spaces like this, Alaskans have been, tackling challenging conversations about COVID-19, whether they're figuring out how to come back to the office or navigating childcare, planning family gatherings. Talking about vaccine provokes powerful feelings about our safety, our health, our freedom, our autonomy, and our responsibility to the communities that we care for. Today, I think what we'll do is there's a number of slides where we're going to go through and review the learnings that we have, and I can move through those, and Aud will be sharing their thoughts as well. If there are questions as we're moving through, don't hesitate to jump in or put up a hand and say, I have a question about that. But at the very end, we'll make sure that there's time for questions and answers. I'll just say that this work, it's that we know that faulty assumptions and loaded words can push a relationship into a vicious cycle of defensiveness, mistrust, and hostility. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today in more detail. When these conversations go wrong, it tears up the social fabric of our community without making it safer and healthier for all of us. And so through this series, we've asked the question, how do we do it better? And now that we've come to the final conversation on this, we want to ask the question, what have we learned? What have we learned from the people that are participating in this? What have we learned through the process of creating it? And so that's what we're going to explore today. So before we do that, and I think some of you may have already seen this, but we want to just share a little bit about the Alaska Humanities Forum and the partnership that we have with the Alaska Children's Trust. And so, Aud, do you want to show the video?
The world is so fast-paced now that there's not a lot of space to just sit and actually listen.
The problems that we face aren't simple. They're layered, they're nuanced.
We get into silos of people who think like us.
And that's what we often ignore. We try to solve problems in a technical way. We try to work around humans and tackle really complex issues. But at the heart of the issue and at the heart of the solution is people. One of the ways that we can build community is through stories. And at the Humanities Forum, what we do with those stories is we use them as our tool. The tool to connect people, a tool to bridge differences. If you really want to strengthen communities, you have to tackle relationships. We play the role of convening, creating that space.
A place where people and ideas could come together.
To talk about and work on the issues that are most important in our community.
Conversations that are actually thought-provoking and that matter.
Imagine if we could work through those things.
The value is bringing such diversity together.
Share values or views of the world.
If you step away from what you think you're supposed to say in a conversation,
you just can't help but have your ideas be influenced and informed by other people's ideas.
open up your mind, and that's how you really connect with people.
It opens us up to be interested in why people are the way they are.
Shared experiences create relationships. And those relationships are what solutions are built on.
And relationships aren't something short-term.
You cannot make community in a single quarter of a single year.
Our work is all about the long game.
I think that's really what's going to change our communities.
It sounds soft, but it's not.
It changes the path to what's possible.
It's the work that can actually change societies.
You start to think about future generations and what their experience is going to be.
We have the opportunity now to change history. We do, and I think we're going to do it.
Then let's have a conversation. What do we want to build?
I next want to move on to a land acknowledgement. And Autumn and I want to acknowledge that we are facilitating this workshop from Anchorage, the current and ancestral homes of the Dena'ina people. The image is a photo of Grandma Olga statue at the small boat harbor, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump from our office here at the train station in Anchorage. Joel Isaac is the sculptor, and if you haven't had a chance to check it out, it's really a beautiful spot overlooking the inlet. It's really important that we take a moment in our meetings to acknowledge where we are and the people of this place, the ancestors that have come before them and the people who are still stewards of this land. And it's also an opportunity for us to be curious, which is so much about what this work is about being curious about where we are and who has been here for so long. So we want to make sure to acknowledge our place. And so we'll jump into our agenda. We're gonna talk about three kinds of learning. First, we're gonna talk about what we've learned from developing these webinars and these workshops. And there certainly has been a lot of learning that has come from just the creation of this and then revisiting that as these have gone on. Second, we want to talk about what we've learned from delivering the webinars and the workshops and listening to the feedback that we've received from so many of you and so many folks who have been involved. And third, we want to learn from ourselves, which is why we're having this, and we want to have an opportunity to talk about it even more. So let's jump into it. The first insight is for us, we learned that the key to depolarizing is shifting our goals and our purpose to make sure the goal is something that the other person would also sign up for. And there's a few parts of this. The first is to prioritize the relationship. We found that it's really important that you see that other person as a person and as a human before you jump into the topic and before you see them as an issue or as a side. So the relationship is so important in terms of how to begin these conversations. The second one is to think about the weakness of your own viewpoint. And we all are subject to the same sort of biases. And so it's important for us to try to notice yours rather than others. A third one is to learn the unspoken story behind the beliefs. What's the story behind the story? How did they come to believe what they believe? How did they come to think what they think? And so really thinking and listening deeply is important. The fourth one is to learn the other person's boundaries and express your own. It's really important that these are spaces where you have a clear sense of where your line is, and you're getting a sense of where others are as well. Aud, did you want to add anything to these? These are really key parts of what we've learned.
So the key takeaway from all of this is that when we enter conversations and we go in with an intention to change someone else's viewpoints, we're not entering the conversation in a way that we're respecting the other person's boundaries. And so when you enter a conversation using these key 4 points that Cameron just talked about, you're entering it without assumptions, without alienating the other person, and acknowledging that you might have inherent biases when you're entering that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And for Rebecca joining us late, we're going to do questions and answers at the end. But if there's anything burning that comes up for anybody, feel free to raise your hand or unmute. Okay, we'll go on to the next insight. And that was that depolarizing vaccine conversations starts with shifting the conversations where we agree. We often think of jumping into challenging conversations with others that we very much don't agree with. And that can be a challenge. It can be a very hard environment. So we advise to begin to practice depolarizing conversations with people you agree with. And what can often happen is that you begin to see these nuanced and subtle distinctions between what you believe, and you begin to explore those. And it's a really powerful way for you to begin to practice engaging in conversations with those that don't agree with you, and can really prepare you to be better suited to engage in more challenging conversations with folks that have very, very different views than you. Aud, anything to add to that?
What I would add to this is just you have someone in your life already, which I feel like is a prime example, that might not always agree with you. And so if you have a trusting bond with that person, sitting down with them and exploring topics that you might not see eye to eye with will allow you to start practicing this, so you can enter other interactions to start hashing that out with other individuals that you might have like a perception of conflict with, but you want to navigate around it.
Yeah, and it really emphasizes the point that trust, or that relationship that is there, often allows you to go into a conversation where you may not agree. And so as you think about having those conversations with those that you don't have a relationship with, that goes back to our previous point about working towards building some connection, some relationship, some human understanding with that person before you try to enter the conversation is going to make the likelihood of that being a positive and productive conversation so much better. So, okay, let's go on to number three. Number three, oh, this is a good one. So whoever is underrepresented in your life will often be overrepresented in your imagination. And when we launched this, many staff worried about tackling specific polarized topics like this, and it would draw out aggressive and grandstanders and bullies in this very, very challenging environment. And it really didn't. But it's really important to remember that those that are different from you, that think differently, that see the world in a very different way, that you may walk into a conversation with an over exaggerated feeling about how they're going to show up. And what we've found in our work that just really is not the case. That most people show up in a very respectful, thoughtful way. Aud, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and so when I look at underrepresented and overrepresented, when we enter these conversations with people, we think about like what could be the worst thing, and then we hype that up, and then that hype sort of becomes a invisible barrier that you now have to climb over to engage more in this conversation. And I know, Sandy, you were here when we were talking about siloing, and Jenny, I believe you were too. And Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is your first time joining us in an actual webinar. And so these are things that we've went over before, and these are things that will help us propel conversations as long as we can recognize that they're happening and they exist.
Yeah, and I think just being aware that can often happen in your mind, that you can sort of in your mind prepare yourself to be in a situation with someone, again, that is very different from you, or shows up in a very different way, and that can affect your ability to engage with them. So, okay, let's go on to
Tamara. I did get one question in the chat from Sandy about otherizing, if you want to go further into that.
Oh, sure. Well, Aud, why don't you start?
So when I think of otherizing, what it means is like, I know my beliefs, I know my biases, I know the things that make me the things that make me. And I also know the people that I really care about, but there might be someone that I might not fully engage with 24/7, and they might be off into another realm in my mind. And so I feel like I have to prepare myself. And so you're putting them in a space that they might not belong in. And so that's how I see otherizing, is not really setting up barriers that don't need to be set up, essentially. And so if you know you want to enter a conversation, like say with a relative that you're 100% on good terms with any conflict, if you're engaging on an initial topic with someone initially, then like you need to provide them with the same grace and kindness as well, and not assume that they have bad intentions.
Yeah, that's great. There's a couple of other things I would add to that. It's really common for us to find connection with others through othering others, right? And so it's often easy for us to find connection when we don't agree with someone else, or that someone else is on a different side. And so we end up building a camp, if you will. And can you believe what those people think, or that person thinks? And it builds a bond between those that are having that conversation. And so that's an often thing that happens is we'll use othering as a way to connect with others. The other piece, though, is that I'm using the word other a lot. The other piece of it, though, is that that it goes back to some of the previous learnings, and that is that othering often happens when we limit people to a topic or to a perspective or a side, and we don't see that whole person, right? And so we embody that person into a stance that they take, and all of a sudden that stance that they take tells us all that we need to know about that person. We know everything we need to know about that person, and that's another piece that I see with othering, is that we take a small amount of information and categorize someone into that based on that. And what we've learned through our work is that by not doing that, by seeing that person as another human being and finding those things that complete them as a person, we learn a lot more about why they believe what they believe. Okay. So we learned that resources can be incredibly important, and here are some of the ones that are out there. It's been really important for folks to go out and to read these kinds of things, and that they can be really applied to specific conversations and situations that folks are in. So we really encourage folks to use the resources that are out there. There's some great ones. Odd, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so with the resources that we've provided throughout the series of the workshop, Amanda Ripley, Monica Guzman, and Kate Murphy have sort of been the foundational elements that have helped us structure these webinars. And the biggest takeaways from these authors are that they don't really pick a side. They challenge you to stay in the middle and engage and find ways to basically navigate that conversation without entering a conflict unnecessarily. And so just giving you skill sets and tools to a variety of topics. So like with Monica Guzman, where she comes from, she has a more political perception when it comes to interactions. But she's also saying, like, I recognize how that could alienate me from interacting with other people that I might agree with. And so I just want to point that out in the resources, which we'll include on the emails that go out as well.
Yeah. It's so true. Staying in the middle can be really powerful. It can also be very alienating, because you often build community through taking a side. And so this work and this place can be challenging. So, okay, let's go on to insight number 5. Awesome. So the number one reason people came to the series is to improve conversations with their family. You can believe it. I do believe it. I can imagine, especially over the last 2 years, where folks have in some ways spent more time with their families than maybe they would normally. And so this is a real key piece for us, is that this is not just about folks who are needing these skills and this at work and in their community, but right at home with the folks that they spend most of their time with. Odd, you want to add anything to this one?
Yeah, I would say that we had a couple hands-on workshops where we did examples to work through this, where we had a couple prompts that were different scenarios, and you were put in different positions. And, these are people that know you, depending on your relationship with your family. And so these are some of the tougher conversations where you have to have. I think Megan did a good job illustrating a specific situation that they had, where they really just had to negotiate and honor the house rules in a sense, but also not alienate their family member that also might have had a differing opinion.
That's good. So the next insight that we have, people's satisfaction with the content depended on the context of the conversations they were having. Odd, do you want to start out on this one?
Yeah, and so I think the biggest thing to take away is that you have childcare workers, you have healthcare workers, you have educators, and then you have your personal life and socially. And so there's multiple realms that you're literally going through every single day that you have to structure how you enter those conversations, because like obviously if I'm at a hospital, the context of that conversation is going to be dramatically different if I'm in a personal setting. And so I think a lot of the people that did show up to the workshops were looking for ways to have conversations with people in different atmospheres and environments that they're not used to being in as well.
Yeah, yeah. I found it really interesting that people negotiating these very concrete decisions with people that disagreed really felt this very helpful, to try to work through that. But the reality is that the people still had to deal with the disappointments and the grief that came in with that. So good. All right, let's go on to the next one. So despite the targeted recruiting efforts that we had, we never attracted anyone who was actually unvaccinated, but we really did see a wide range of ideological positions about vaccines and vaccine mandates. Is any of this data, do you want to talk about any of this data specifically?
What I would say about the data that was presented, because we did a pre and post survey. And so obviously we asked your insights before you came into these spaces, what you were seeking out of it. And then the post survey gave you a chance to sort of reflect on what you got out of it. And from what I've gathered from looking at this data is that, did anyone really shift their perspectives that they didn't already have? No, not necessarily, but I think they recognize that they found new resources to help navigate tough conversations in their life, which ultimately is the intention of depolarizing vaccine conversations.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This next one is I think it really speaks to the idea that there is a lot of fear and that goes into entering into conversations that are challenging, and people often feel ill-equipped with how to do it. And so the idea that these workshops and these tools and these resources and the opportunity to actually practice some of this gave folks a lot of confidence, and as well as, they learned a lot. They felt like they got new approaches. Lots of really powerful reactions to giving people some really valuable tools in walking into these conversations. So I think a question popped up. Did I miss that?
Yeah, it looks like Rebecca put in the chat that statewide Alaska surveys have found that friends and family are the biggest influencers and trusted messengers for people who are still deciding on the COVID-19 vaccination.
Yeah, that's
Thank you for sharing that, Rebecca.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of your experience with these webinars, what were the things that you found that the folks got from it the most?
When I see the word relieving or relieved, I feel that people were showing up to these spaces, from what I saw, to find a community, and also find a community that wasn't necessarily 100% agreeing with them. And so willfully entering an environment where there might be some disagreement, but it's a safe space. The confidence to exit the conversation, to continue the conversations outside the webinar and the workshops, the empathy and the compassion with recognizing where someone might be in their life, the historical aspect to why someone might not want to get a vaccine, taking that in consideration. The information, not feeling like you need to badger people down. I feel like people left with more of a streamlined idea of how they want to broach these conversations and not feel like they had to enter it being an expert to advocate for something. So.
Yeah. I find that there's lots of, it seems like that there's lots of communities of mutual belief, right? There's places you can go and groups you can join of folks that really have similar stances on many things. But there's not often a community of learners, of folks who really want to explore difference, who want to be in spaces and be with folks where they're listening and they're understanding things that are very different from where they stand. And I just can't think of anything more important to today, with the amount of difference and debate and divisiveness that we see in our world, in our state, and in our communities, how much more valuable these kinds of tools are. And so I love the idea of this idea of building a community of people who want to be engaged in this kind of work and want to be engaged with folks who are different from them and do that in a respectful and thoughtful way. So this gives me a lot of hope in many ways about where we're going. So thanks. The next one, let's move past that. I think those are like, yeah, we found ourselves trying to persuade people to let go of their goal of persuasion, which is really a funny play on words. But persuasion is possible when people are uncertain and feel conflicted or just feel disengaged. And I think that we've learned is the evidence-based strategies for persuasion, like motivational interviewing, that we would all do to learn. And so, Aud, do you want to talk a little bit about this in terms of your experience?
Yeah, so what I would say, like when it comes down to persuasion, when you enter conversations, and I think in our workshops, like the one thing that I noticed was that when you come in with a pre-plan, like I'm gonna convince this person to do this. These are my 3 points that I'm gonna use, the tools and the tool sets to get them to think what I want to do is you're not a lawyer in this context. And so there's no need to persuade if you're actually having a conversation and you're approaching each other as equals.
Yeah. So there's a workshop that we do called the Art of Powerful Questions. And we feel like that it's one of the most credible tools to have, to be able to ask a powerful question that generates conversation and insight and thought, and that the question should be something that's really engaging to people who have very different beliefs, right? But what we find is that when people are learning how to craft a question, that it's often not really a question. It's often an attempt to persuade someone within that question. So getting people to see those and go, oh, I'm really trying to promote my perspective through answering that question in how I'm wording it and how I'm doing it. And so to really ask truly genuine questions that are not intended to persuade is a really difficult thing. And I think so this is a really a powerful idea of how do we get away from trying to persuade others into a place of true curiosity and true listening.
I just want to acknowledge Jenny's chat message. This was a big takeaway for me. Swapping curiosity for a persuasion agenda. And then Rebecca also shared a reference. I would also say, Sandy, you attended a workshop where we went through a list of videos that you found very useful, where it was from a wide ranging of perspectives. And we had to sit there and we changed breakout rooms, engaging with different people and taking a moment to break down questions that might seem a little bit convoluted, a little bit layered, and a little bit problematic at times, and just putting too much energy into it when it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. It's a very enlightening thing when you start to realize that many of the questions and comments and things that you're doing day to day are really sort of layered with an attempt to convince someone of something, and to be more aware of that is a very powerful thing. So wonderful. We're almost through, and then we'll have time for questions and discussions, which is the most fun part. Aud, do you want to take the last one?
Yeah, so with this one, what I would specifically call to attention is, especially with everything going in the world and the community events, especially with people going back outside a little bit, is yes, there's conflicting events going on, and we can't expect people to on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights all the time. 6 to 8 p.m. is a high time where sports might be going on. But with the webinars, with the lunch and learns, which is so precious about it, which I like, is that you don't have to be on camera. You don't have to participate. It can be like a radio program that you have playing in the background. And so I think that's what really attracted people to this presentation and this experience. And then the aspect that these are recorded and then also available on YouTube as well. And so they're accessible. If you can't make them, you can share them out to your network. And so I feel like that's the bigger attraction to it. And so if you want to take we have 6 currently posted, there'll be a total of 8 by the conclusion of Saturday. You can take these webinars and share them with your friends and your family. They're going to forever be on the Alaska Humanities Forum site. And I think that's wonderful. And so it's an evergreen product that we're able to provide to the community in collaboration with our partners.
Yeah. Well, and I just really want to acknowledge this little circle that is in there, because it's a real learning for us as well. We are an organization that often really wants to create conversation and dialogue and ask people to really engage. And we feel like that we get a lot more out of it in that scenario where people are really talking and dialoguing. But there's a space for a webinar. There's a space for sharing information out and for people just to sort of sit back and listen to it and to let it absorb into their mind and into their body, and then process that in their own way. And so this is a good learning experience for us, that this is a great medium for making sure that folks are thinking about really important things. So let's go 11. Let's see. But given our organizational values, we are much more comfortable with workshops and webinars, which is exactly what I said. And so this is more of, I think, a learning for us in terms of the value of this kind of work and how we can incorporate this into the things that we do. So the last one is we want to practice the stuff too. We want to practice how to do more depolarizing conversations, and we feel like that we learned that through this, because we do conversations about climate change and preserving language and homelessness and media, and just lots of different conversations we've done over the years and continue to do. And have thought a lot about how to bring people together who have very different views on this. And so we've learned a lot about how we can apply some of these skills to our own work, and really begin to build this more and more. So we want to do more of this as well. And so if there are topics that you have or you can think of that you feel like we need to tackle, we want to know more about those. Aude, you want to wrap us up with this?
Yeah, so the tagline for the webinar and the workshop series for Depolarizing Vaccine Conversations has been "Be curious, not judgmental." And one quote that we've been extremely relying on to help propel this conversation is, sometimes it's not just that other people don't understand us, it's that we don't understand ourselves. And Amanda Ripley is one person that we've relied on the resource heavily to drive these conversations. And I feel like it also grounds us in acknowledging that we don't have all the answers. And so if we do want to have these conversations, we have to realize that we're entering these spaces and we're not the expert. Professionally, if you are an expert, I'm not going to take that away from you, but hopefully when you are engaging with people, it's not like hitting resource after resource, because when you hit people over their head constantly, it alienates them. So I think that's a big thing that I've taken away from the webinars, just sitting in all of them. I've been able to engage with Jenny and Sandy on multiple levels, and I just want to say thank you for attending. And Cameron, do you have anything you want to add to the slide? Or
no, I really appreciate those that have attended this, and thank you, Aude, for all of your work on it. And it's just so vital, as I said earlier, in our world today. We really need to be doing more of this work. So we're excited to see where this goes. Okay, so let's open it up to questions and answers. If folks
before we get started, I just want to recognize that we want to present our questions in a way that they're unbiased, that they're not alienating and polarized in the sense where we're talking about politics or anything. Present your question in a manner that anyone can enter the conversation, per usual. So,
right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aude. Who'd like to get us started with a question or a comment?
Yeah, Rebecca, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could go back to that slide of the plot of participants in the webinars series. I didn't have enough time to look at that.
And I just want to make sure that I'm thinking of the specific one. You're talking about the graph one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Just give me one moment. I'll pull it right up for you.
Thank you.
I also just want to acknowledge that I will be sharing out these resources at the conclusion of this webinar as well. And so you'll be able to take this with you. I can also share out the previous slides from the 7 previous webinars too, so you have everything and you can look at it as well.
And Aude, the writing is a little small. Do you want to tell us what are the different categories? Oh, there we go. We can zoom in and then maybe even move it over a little bit to the left so we could.
So the point of this slide is that most of the participants I'm sorry, you had a summary statement on this slide as well. I appreciate the zoom in. You never interacted anyone who was unvaccinated themselves.
We never did. And I will totally agree with Cameron's emphasis of I was afraid, just as a staff member, that we would have people that were just showing up to not participate. And I was pleasantly survived. That was not the case. We also had people that participated that definitely had people in their lives that were unvaccinated. And I felt like they left the workshop and the webinars with compassion and learning how to deal with them with softer hands and not animosity for not doing something, if that makes sense. So,
yeah.
Cool.
Thank you for
Yeah,
pulling
no
that up
problem.
for me.
Yeah, anytime, Rebecca. And then it looks like we have something in the chat. Jenny said, I'm going to chat my question so as not to put anyone on the spot, but can anyone here share an experience in applying the curiosity approach with someone who has a differing opinion? What happened? And anyone can unmute. I have an example too, if I need to. It looks like Sandy.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that people feel less threatened when you're just curious about it and wanting to know and to understand. They are less defensive and they're more open, is what I found. And I wanted to make a comment, not to detract from what Jenny said or change the subject necessarily, but to say I really appreciated the workshops because for me, actually doing it is helpful. And I don't mind, and I don't know that others feel this way, but I don't mind being observed by someone that has more skills than me and then giving me suggestions. And I know a couple times I asked for input and received it on my approach, and I appreciated that.
What I will say with that conversation is I definitely have friends on multiple generational levels in my life. I will acknowledge that I do have a family member that I happen to stay with that is unvaccinated, and I know there's historical context to them not doing it. And so we've had some tough conversations, but I also understand that they are in their 7th decade of life. And so there are certain things that they're apprehensive about because they've witnessed different things. And so I think once we can come into a conversation, we know that people have different lived in experiences than us, and just see eye to eye and mutually like this is another human being, that just takes the pressure off the conversation. But if you go in hot headed, like you're going to get a hot headed response almost. So.
Well, and I would just share that I because of the work that I do, I'm in these conversations a lot, and I'm with people that I don't know, and I really want to emphasize the trust building part of it, because I mean I've been in conversations with people who are really set up to fight and have absolutely polar beliefs in terms of issues and the way they see the world and politics and all of those things. And I have seen firsthand many times the power of asking somebody about themselves. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your family. Tell me about where you're from. How did you grow up? You know, spending 5 or 10 minutes sharing a little bit about your life and about who you are and about your family and about your community and about your job and then finding some connections there. Oh, you have kids? I have kids too. How old are your kids? Oh, mine are this age. Where do they go to school? You know, what are some of the things you like to do? That in itself, in a 5, 10, 15-minute time frame, can absolutely transform a conversation about huge topics. And so I've seen that firsthand, and it feels awkward sometimes because you're in a business meeting or you're going to lunch with somebody or you're supposed to be talking about this topic. But if you can figure out a way to pause it and go, before we jump into that, let's get to know each other a little bit. I'm curious. I'm curious about you. Tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you come to Alaska? Those will absolutely transform your difficult conversations. So I just want to really emphasize that piece can happen in a small dose. It doesn't have to be a lot, and it could really, really make a big, big difference.
Thanks, Jenny. Rebecca, you're unmuted, so I'm assuming you want to ask a.
Well, my biggest conflicts are with the people closest to me, I find, though. Definitely within my sphere, but in my household, we're definitely, my spouse and I cancel each other out in so many different things within our community, and are still really struggling with this vaccination issue, especially with our children. So so I guess some of the techniques, I guess, wouldn't apply because I'm very close to this person. I go to bed with him every night. But we're gradually making it. It's been interesting, though, to observe his interaction, our conversation with the pediatrician. And just for the group, my background is I work with at the university on several projects that are trying to address uptake of vaccination, which has been fascinating considering my personal situation. And I have found, at least in our specific situation with the pediatrician, that it's been an educational experience for her as a clinician, and developing the conversation with us as patients. And I feel like early on, she missed a couple opportunities just because of the checklist for that appointment was slightly different, and we were limited on time. I guess the comment I wanted to make is I'm so glad you're making time and space for talking through this and just talking about talking.
Yeah. Well, and I resonate with so much of what you've said, and I think to myself, sometimes it feels you're too close to have the conversation, but somebody who has more distance might even be in a better place to have a conversation, right? But I also am curious about something you said, is have you guys explored the sort of the origins of why you believe what you believe, of how you came to believe the things you do, and how he came to believe the things he has? I only ask that because as a parent myself, one of the things that I have found is I'm discovering through my parenting that of where my belief about what I think my child should or shouldn't do comes from. And it often comes from my own childhood or my own upbringing or my own experiences. And I think to myself, wow, why do I want them to do that so much? Or why is that so important to me? I don't understand. And my wife would ask me, why is that so important to you? Right. And just exploring that myself, I've learned a lot about, why I believe what I believe. So I offer that is that I think that can be a way for people to self-discover, as opposed to having someone else communicate with them, but just kind of figuring out how I came to be where I am and why I believe the things I believe.
A lot of times it comes down to a fight of white papers, though. I've cited this, I'm citing this, and in a lot of ways, we hardly know anything about the way the immune system works for the entire population. There's still a lot for us to learn in many different aspects about ourselves and the science.
Very, very, very true. Very true. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Rebecca. Jenny, I see that you have your hand raised if you want to unmute.
Yeah, this is kind of pulling us back from that, which is really interesting. But I guess I'm noticing a theme that I had never considered before, which is kind of this sense that urgency really doesn't serve us in these conversations. And it seemed like when vaccines were released, it was so urgent because you want to protect yourself as quickly as possible and the ones you love and the people that are coming into your business or whatever it is. But now if it's a matter of, potentially turning them away, making them dig in further to an unsafe belief, whatever it is, versus taking the time to like develop the conversation and setting vaccines aside, like even if you don't ever like accomplish what you want them to believe, like there are all these other benefits, common ground, you might form a relationship that serves in other ways. So yeah, just allowing time and space and factoring that into the curiosity and the conversation building that is not immediate for something like this.
Absolutely. The way that I see that happening is just not having expectations socially of your friends that, don't want to engage on like surface level conversations, and also knowing who your friends are that do you want to have like those sort of chapter conversations so you can prepare yourself to navigate that space as well.
Well, and making the distinction between I want to know more about you, I want to understand you, I want to build more relationship with you, and I want to get you to do something. Right. I mean, and just being really honest with yourself about that, about whether you really do want to do all those other things, or ultimately do I just want to get you to do the thing that I want you to do, right? And so that a lot of that other stuff can be not real and genuine, and so I think that's a piece as well. But I would agree with you that there's incredible benefits that come from approaching conversation in this way beyond vaccines, and can really transform, the conversations you're having with your friends. But also, this is things you can do at work, and these are things you can do in your, community organizations and church, and it can really sort of help you to better understand where people are coming from, and build some common understanding around issues that are very challenging.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Two things I thought of. I appreciated On's example. I appreciate your example about your relative, and both of you are you understand where you're coming from. And unfortunately, early in this pandemic, I didn't realize where one individual was coming from, and it just seemed their thoughts are rational. Then when I understood where they were coming from, it made more sense, and I wish I had done that earlier. One thing that this makes me think of is for future topics, the topic of veracity, or how we source things. So many people, sources of information, and I've attended a number of classes on that. I really like the chart, which shows where things lean to the right, things lean to, we're becoming more and more polarized, and understanding sources. I worked early on substituting and working in libraries and fact checking, and so that's an interesting thing to me, which when I look at sources, so something about that teaching, I guess that would be more of an educational thing. But sources, and the other comment I had very quickly was with Rebecca talking about the pediatrician. In my personal example that I mentioned, I think had the pediatrician been able to have more time, I think that's a key issue. The pediatrician having time and knowing how to approach the topic would have been helpful. And I don't know, I know the pediatrician personally. I know the just probably didn't hit it at that right time, the right approach. And so training there maybe. Let's see if I can figure out how to put my hand down.
I'll go ahead and take care of that for you. I got you.
I'm looking, so I'll learn. Okay, thank you, On. Oh.
No, Rebecca, it's great. This is what it's all about. This is about having conversations that we need to have. So it's great.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say is that Sandy and I are from the same area, and I'm pretty sure I've interacted with your son before growing up in the community when I was way younger. And I think the one thing you did was like ground me that there's multiple people going through multiple different experiences, and that sometimes like you might think you're in an isolated domain, but that's really not the case. So.
Very true. Well, wonderful. Well, I just want to share a big thank you to everyone who've been a part of this today. And again, thank you to Aude and the whole team at the Alaska Humanities Forum for putting these webinars on, and hopefully people will watch them and use them and benefit from them. And we will continue to do this work. So thank you for the ideas about other topics. And know that we will continue to reach out to the community and invite people to this kind of work. So thanks again for your time today, and enjoy the sunny day outside.